Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. It's a Dump the Corruption show. Our topic for tonight is the Maladaptive Giant, Part 2. It is Friday night, of course, and I'm joined by my friend, Dee Pierce, from around the world with Dee and Friends. How are you tonight, Dee?
Oh, I'm doing fine. How are you doing, Joe?
I'm doing fine, too. Thank you very much. I'm
Oh, hi,
glad it's
Steve.
Friday night.
Yes. And
Okay,
Steve Wolfbrand is here. And Andy Candy just showed up.
oh, that's good. Hey, Steve. Hey, Andy. How you doing? You're listening in the background of your kids, right? And Steve says, "Thank God it's Friday." Well, I guess it's not such a thank God since I guess the war started up again.
Oh, I know. Right before then, I'd heard that it was agreed on to extend it.
Yeah, I'd heard for another 5 days. I was surprised when it started up again. But I guess the Israelis, they probably thought they had things figured out, and they're probably anxious to go back and see if they really had things figured out and if they knew what to do about Hamas. But from what I hear, they're getting their heads handed to them. So
Oh, yeah.
that's actually what we expected would happen, I think. And he says, yes, 5 grandkids for the weekend. Wow. Kay says, hi, Joe D and all. Thank you, Kay. Uh, oh, I have a message from Bonnie Firestone here, but she's sitting right across from me. I don't know what that says. It says, oh, thank you, honey. Okay, so uh,
Well,
I
you know
have,
what else I heard? I also want to say that I recently heard too was Netanyahu saying that his backup plan is the fact that right now what he's doing is looking to thin the population in Gaza.
oh, his backup plan is to thin the
Yeah.
population in Gaza. So
Yes.
he's not trying to commit a genocide. He's just trying to commit an ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
He hopes to
He's
escape.
mowing the
Right.
lawn, right?
Amazing. Steve Wolfbrand says there was an intermission so we could buy popcorn. Okay, so I'm going to talk about only 2 things tonight. The first one, is a bit about the housing crisis. I guess this is one of the big concerns of RFKJ. So he's got some thoughts on that, but evidently his thoughts are ignoring something really important. This was an opinion piece from Common Dreams. There's a picture of RFKJ. Former Democratic Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. holds a campaign event with voters in Brooklyn on August 30th, 2023 in New York City. And that was the headline of this is RFK Jr.'s housing policy gives Republican mega donor a pass. If Kennedy was serious about combating the rise of corporate homeownership, or the perception that he's a de facto Republican candidate for that matter, he would call out Blackstone's nefarious influence by name. Again, this was done on November 29, 2023 by Common Dreams. The author is Aidan Smith. I guess I don't even know who Aidan Smith is. At a time when working Americans struggle to make ends meet on multiple fronts, one cost of living crisis stands out as particularly dire: the national housing crisis. In our largest cities, decades of systemic underbuilding, de facto mandated by bans on multifamily housing, have made housing a nightmare for long-time residents and newcomers alike. But the housing crisis extends well past New York and San Francisco. Extreme inequality and poor monetary policy have made it difficult to rent and own homes across much of rural and suburban America. The crisis has been exacerbated by the rise of corporate homeownership, which has put housing security further out of reach for working Americans. Since launching his quixotic presidential candidacy, I guess we have a word there that shows a little bias against the candidate. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Mhm.
has made the issue of corporate home ownership central to his campaign. On the campaign trail, he's notably criticized investment firms BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street by name, arguing they will someday be able to, quote, outbid your children, unquote. I think they've been outbidding our children now. But interestingly, Kennedy's railing against corporate home ownership has not extended to the firm that best embodies the encroachment of finance to housing. Okay, I cut off D for a while because of the noise coming from the dog. There's Robert Copeland. Blackstone is evil, and of other corporates are just as bad. So to go on with this, the firm that best embodies the encroachment of finance into housing is Blackstone. It's unlikely Kennedy's hands-off approach to Blackstone is a coincidence, since originally entering the race as a reactionary candidate running in a Democratic primary. There's another label again: reactionary. I'm not sure what was exactly reactionary about Bobby Kennedy. Well, maybe his gross support for Israel was reactionary, like all the way back to the 1970s or 1960s. Given that Blackstone CEO Stephen Schwarzman is a Donald Trump loving Republican mega donor, it's pretty easy to connect the dots on Kennedy's rhetorical silence. In the 2022 cycle alone, Schwartzman gave over $35 million to congressional Republican campaigns. I will unmute these mic now. Oh. I guess I was so smart here I removed myself from the stage. Okay. So Dee muted herself, so I'm unable to unmute her now. We'll get that straightened out a little later. It's pretty easy to connect the dots on Kennedy's rhetorical silence. In the 2022 cycle alone, Schwartzman gave over $35 million to congressional Republican campaigns. If Kennedy was serious about combating the rise of corporate home ownership, or the perception that he's a de facto Republican candidate for that matter, he would call out Blackstone's nefarious influence by name. It's a shame, really, because at a time when Blackstone is pushing even deeper into the housing market, it would be useful to call attention to the company's detrimental impact. The time of Blackstone being content with its status as a commercial real estate giant is long gone. Since the financial crisis, the company has established a strong presence in everything from predatory rent to own schemes to student housing. Blackstone's seemingly insatiable quest for dominance in the rental home market has been met with criticism in and outside the United States. Blackstone's early push into housing occurred in the aftermath of the subprime crisis in mortgages. That's back in what, 2007, 2008, 2009, when it profited handsomely off home foreclosures. Like other major institutional investors that have pushed into housing, Blackstone has taken advantage of strict zoning laws that constrain the creative development of new housing. Invitation homes, owned by Blackstone from 2012 to 2019, even acknowledged in an SEC filing that it invests in markets that we expect will exhibit lower new supply. At a time when home prices in key markets continue to skyrocket, Blackstone and similar firms have caused further pain by accelerating the corporatization of U.S. home ownership. In America's Sun Belt, a macro region known for relatively affordable middle and working class housing opportunities, private investors' impact has been particularly dire. By one metric, over a third of homes bought in markets, including Atlanta, Phoenix, and Charlotte, were made by corporate investors in the first quarter of 2021. That's the first time I've heard Charlotte, North Carolina identified as being in the Sun Belt. Well, with prospects for home ownership in coastal metropolitan areas increasingly unrealistic for middle class Americans, Blackstone and other private investors' push into the Sun Belt threatens remaining opportunities for home ownership, given the evidence that corporate home ownership efforts disproportionately target housing stock in black majority neighborhoods. These schemes threaten to further exacerbate the racial wealth gap. As negative headlines surrounding Blackstone's housing push mount, it's no surprise the company has desperately tried to reclaim the narrative in its favor. Blackstone has aggressively touted Home Partners of America, a rent-to-own company acquired in 2021, as a service to help tenants eventually own their own properties. Given that around 85% of renters of single-family homes, by one estimate, wouldn't qualify for a mortgage, it's not hard to see the program's appeal. But rather than giving renters a shot at the American dream, tenants in Home Partners properties have faced nightmarish housing conditions made worse by high prices and predatory contract terms. Even worse, this has often been accompanied by harm to tenants' credit scores, putting the dream of home ownership even further out of reach. The harm caused by Blackstone's effort to dominate rental housing extends beyond tenants and prospective home buyers. First launched in 2017, the Blackstone Real Estate Income Trust, known as BRIGHT, has come under fire by regulators for its unconventional if shady investment structure. Funded largely through borrowed money, BRIGHT, quote, invests with roughly 50% borrowed money, unquote, with a focus on rental apartments in Sunbelt communities. Per the Wall Street Journal, BRIGHT's limits on redemptions amid investor discontent has caught the ire of the SEC. It's not hard to see why a trust that aggressively limits withdrawals in the face of investor discontent should not be trusted to continue its expansion in one of the country's most crucial economic sectors In a congressional testimony earlier this year, Duke law professor Gina Gale S. Fletcher compared Bright's unethical practices to that of FTX, a notorious crypto hedge fund founded by Sam Bankman-Fried, otherwise known as SBF. Given that Republicans were only able to capture the House by the narrowest of margins in 2022, it's easy to make the case that Blackstone CEO Schwartzman Millions played a decisive role. Okay. Amid the Republican-induced chaos of the 118th Congress and the House, party lawmakers have pushed hard for policies that would make the housing crisis even worse. This includes Republicans' push for cuts to housing assistance and efforts to sabotage the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a federal agency that has fought hard for tenants. While Kennedy has cried foul about supposedly disproportionate media criticism of his campaign, his silence on Blackstone is yet another mark against taking him seriously as a candidate. This article suggesting is that perhaps Kennedy is silent on Blackstone because he may be getting funded by Schwartzman in some way. That is an interesting suggestion, or implication. I have not yet had the ability to verify that as yet, but I do think that's an interesting possibility and an interesting speculation that we ought to keep our eye on, and it's especially relevant in the case of dump the corruption. Is that what is going on there? I don't know. I can't really say as yet, but I'm about to move on to the second of our pieces, but I'm going to take a look at the comments first. Robert Copeland, who always has interesting comments, says, Blackstone is evil, and a lot of other corporates are just as bad. Yeah. And as an ACCE member, we are going against members of the California Apartment Association, which includes includes Blackstone. Let me see if I can unmute Dee here. Not yet. She's still is on mute. Okay. So, Kay Ryan says, busy Andy, in response to Andy's taking care of 5 children. And Robert Copeland says, ACCE is Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, and we fight for tenant rights. Everybody thanks Robert for that, as they should. Evelina says, not sure the Sun Belt will be desirable for long, with extreme heat becoming the new normal. Yes, of course, we all have to worry about that. So, my next piece is actually one that I wrote way back in 2009. And in the piece, I did an analysis of why the United States political system seems so frozen and unable to adapt to change. This was in the first year of the Obama administration. It was written in 2009. Let me see the date right now. July 30th of 2009. It was sandwiched between a blog about how things work, in the real world, which was a blog about basically Medicare for All, if I'm not mistaken. But the blog after it was called The Obama Message Machine is Broken, Fix It, with Medicare for All. So I was really focused on the difficulties of getting Medicare for All passed in the federal government. But of course, there were a lot of other things that we were having a problem with at the time. It was still basically close to the start of a new administration, and it was one that had heavy majorities in both the Congress and the Senate. I don't know if it had reached the stage yet where there were 60 senators. That was only the case for a few months, but I think by July 30th we had reached that stage because I believe Ted Kennedy died in, uh, I think, in August of 2009, if I recall correctly. So this was before his death. Anyway, there were heavy majorities for Obama, and he seemed to be paralyzed in what he was able to get through Congress. Anyway, the reason why I wanted to uh, redo this blog post or call renewed attention to it was because at that time it was not yet so clear that everybody was thoroughly bought. It was before the 2010 uh, 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 Citizens United case came down. And of course, even though there were pretty big sums of money in politics at that time, it's nowhere near what we have now. It was back then nowhere near as corrupt as it was now. There was corruption. There was corruption, particularly in the fight for Medicare for all. But anyway, things were different. But still, the political system was not adapting to change. It wasn't solving any problems. So I wanted to talk about why this was the case back then. And then I wanted to add the problem of the extreme influence of money in politics, which we see now, in order so people could fully understand why things are even more difficult now in terms of getting things passed that the people favor. So here is the maladaptive giant. I am going to present that. It's an old blog, so the site it was on has long since been taken down, and I retrieved it from the Wayback Machine because I remembered I had done it, and I thought it would be very relevant for Dump the Corruption. So here we are. This is a picture, this is a graphic from a painting by Thomas Cole. I forget, the name of the painting, but I used to adorn my blog posts with lots of paintings from Thomas Cole, and I'm trying to remember the name of the British painter. I think it was W.J. Mallard. There was a movie about him, by the way, very, very interesting movie at one point. But getting to the business of the day, at Huffington Post a few days ago, Michael Brenner, lamenting the current display of plutocracy in Congress, had this to say, quote, "We vaunt, American democracy as a stellar model for the world. The bizarre spectacle now on display in Washington as the White House and Congress tussle over health care, quote, reform, unquote, is hardly an advertisement from a prime export product." He's referring here to democracy, so-called democracy. Considering the following: the nation's entire medical system is being reshaped. I don't think that's what happened, but it's being reshaped by 6 senators meeting behind closed doors for weeks. All we know of the proceedings is through puffs of smoke leaking under the doors. He was drawing, of course, the analogy to the election of popes. The other 529 members of Congress twiddle their thumbs awaiting the conclave's outcome. The Gang of Six states that the Gang of Six composes 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats from states that cumulatively contain less than 3% of the country's population. Now, why 6 senators were appointed 3 and 3 in this case, rather than something like 4 and 2, since the Democrats had 60 Senate seats, why should the Republicans have gotten an equal share of this particular committee? Not sure why that happened. But anyway, they were from states that contain less than 3% of the country's population. All are more conservative than the large majority of Democrats who control 60 Senate seats, and much more conservative than most Democratic representatives in the House. They've just killed the, quote, public option, unquote, that is favored by 72% of the American public. They have also rejected, it reminds us, the public option was once more popular, than Medicare for All. Popularity of Medicare for All was great too, about 65%, but even the public option was even greater. Not that the public option was any good, but that's another story. They have also rejected out of hand, the provision for financing the costs of the program via a tax on the rich, as approved by the key committee in the House. So too for the employer mandate that has been at the heart of all serious proposed plans until the Gang of Six decided otherwise. Excuse me a second while I take some pills. The irony of Brenner's lament, of course, is that, quote, American democracy, unquote, is just not very democratic when it comes to the workings of our government. That's the problem. Lack of democracy starts with the framers' specification of indirect election of senators. It continued with the Supreme Court and lifetime terms for justices. The president was to be selected by the independent electors chosen by the state legislatures. Oh, so a lot of this changed over time, of course, but of course, the Electoral College thwarted the will of the people as late as the year 2000. And the Supreme Court is still comprised of only 9 justices selected for life. Even though many democratic elements were added to the U.S. system over time, many anti-democratic elements were maintained or even added. In the legislature, the development of the seniority system and the filibuster in the Senate introduced heavy constraints on the popular will. Also, apportionment is heavily manipulated by state legislatures to safeguard the rural influence in Congress all through the United States at the expense of more dynamic urban and suburban interests. That particular thing has only gotten worse because of the gerrymandering and the voter suppression that has taken place over the years since 2009. Moreover, the creation of the Federal Reserve and its insulation from politics has led to the curious situation where the president supposedly has the responsibility for the state of the economy, yet the Federal Reserve has most often had much more influence on the economy than the president. Finally, in the modern presidency, and I have to advert to what was most recently the case, when, of course, the economy has been very strong in spite of the attempts by the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates and crunch parts of the economy while benefiting those uh, who can afford to buy debt instruments and get higher returns on those debt instruments because the interest rates are much higher, okay, across the board. Uh, it also creates all kinds of opportunities uh, for wealthy people to control property, okay, and real estate, and for middle class people to be frozen out by the high interest rates. Yet the Federal Reserve has most often had much more influence on the economy than the president. Finally, in the modern presidency, we've seen the growth of presidential power interrupted a bit by the Ford Carter eras, but then increasing again starting with Reagan, until the claims of unprecedented executive power, accompanied by legally questionable actions, we've recently seen from the Bush administration. This executive power has thus far been at once ultimately responsible to democratic constraints and quite capable of actually manipulating the consent of the population in the Congress in certain areas related to national security, so that it quite often masters and escapes those constraints. Of course, this trend has only gotten worse since 2009, and certainly with respect to foreign policy these days. Uh, we see the manipulation of the consent of the population in full force with respect to the Ukraine war, and also to a great degree with respect to the Gaza war, as well. Uh, we see stubborn presidents doing things, at least in Gaza, that have strongly objected to by large numbers, of people. And we apparently, as yet, aren't able to do anything about it. When it comes to Ukraine, of course, we've had, the manipulation of the consent of the population through a mass media, which has refused to tell the truth about the war, in Ukraine since the inception of that war. It is now beginning to dawn on the mass media, and the mainstream, that maybe Ukraine is losing. We've been watching the war, knew that Ukraine was always losing. It was always losing from the first month. They knew they were losing because they negotiated a peace. The peace fell through because the Western powers sent in Boris Johnson to talk to Zelensky and to say if he accepted this peace agreement with the Russians, he wasn't going to get any further support from the West, at all. And so it was apparent, evidently, to the Ukrainians, even back then, in March and April of 2022, they were losing. But it failed to dawn, on our media that's supposed to inform us, and they kept coming with narratives suggesting, that the Ukrainians were winning right along when they were being slaughtered in the hundreds of thousands. Now people are openly talking about how they experienced 500,000 dead in that particular war. On the other hand, when national security is not involved, the power of the president is often constrained by an anti-democratic, small d, quote unquote, Congress, even when the president reflects a popular desire to solve certain persistent social problems. All of these anti-democratic elements are interrelated, but untying the Gordian knot they form is heavily dependent on legislation Congress is willing to pass. That in turn is very dependent on the capability of senators to use the filibuster and the seniority system to block all change, or to at least exact a heavy toll for their agreement in the form of concessions favorable to their states or districts at the expense of the common interest. When I wrote that, I was in particular thinking of the Montana Senator Max Baucus, who was in a key committee position with respect to consideration of the healthcare reform, and in order to get his agreement to back at least some reform bill. The proponents of healthcare reform had to agree to make him the concession of making the minors in his states actually get the equivalent, of Medicare for all for themselves. So he got Medicare for all for them while denying it to everybody else. That was old Max Baucus. So I think the filibuster and the seniority system are at the center of anti-democratic elements we see in the U.S. political system. And we add the influence of lobbyists who are better funded than they ever have been in the past to these anti-democratic levers, we can see why plutocracy is emerging, in the United States. Of course, the influence of lobbyists is even much greater now in the 14 years, even though back in 2009, we know that AIPAC was powerful then, and it was hard to criticize Israel back then. But you didn't have AIPAC basically running around in primaries in those years, spending huge fortunes to defeat people, who are progressive, or who weren't even that progressive, but who occasionally insisted on respect for Palestinian rights. Not like you have now. This is just a scandalous expenditure of money to defeat people, not even in terms of an open discussion of what they were saying, about Israel, or saying about, the Palestinians, but opposing them and running ads based on their positions in all sorts of other areas. In other words, just simply dedicated not even to the discussion of the issue they really cared about, but of course, what they were trying to do is to defeat people who were simply unacceptable to them because of their positions on Israel and Palestine. Powerful and rich corporate interests provide legislators with information and financial support they need to communicate with their constituents and construct a narrative capable of persuading them that they're being well represented. The flow of information and financial support is constant. It's an everyday thing. Even more today, it's an everyday thing. But the flow of information and financial support from constituents, from you and me, from the voters, is intermittent and waxes and wanes with the mass media attention given to particular issues. So the mass media can manipulate, actually, the financial support that comes from the constituents by not talking about certain issues, refusing to talk about them. Now, political parties appeal to the public at large, and they aggregate interests very broadly. Their interest is in programs that fulfill public needs as they interpret those needs. That was my perception back then. I don't think I would say that now. But what the parties want to validate in the form of campaign promises and broad programs always takes a back seat to what lobbyists and corporatists want. Because the filibuster and seniority systems in Congress give individual committee chairpersons and senators great power relative to party leaders. It is power they can use to obstruct change and defend the interests of lobbyists and corporatists against the forces of change in general and against specific changes that the parties may have promised, to the public. Now, I would also amend that now, and the reason why, I would, is that it seems to me that now the parties are thoroughly penetrated by the lobbyists, and corporatists. Certainly, with respect to the Democratic National Committee, uh, in recent years, uh, various people who were part of the DNC back in 2009 and 2010 and had influence then have been replaced by people who were basically lobbyists for the corporations and who were involved in deal flows with the corporations on one side and the candidates, on the other, the so-called consultants who recently have been dominating the party committees, of course, in the Republican Party, but very notably in the Democratic Party. Uh, since the Obama administration, we saw it more and more. Came the Obama administration, we saw it again when these consultants very actively blocked the candidacy of Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020, and where anybody watching those elections and the politics surrounding them became convinced that the consultants who were running the Democratic Party were much more interested in their deal flow and their relations with the corporate contributors and the wealthy contributors than they were in actually winning the presidency or having their party win in Congress. Uh, the big problem with all this, I said back in July of 2009, is that the United States of America, like any complex adaptive system, I was looking at this from the viewpoint of complex adaptive systems theory, at that time. And I can use that lens now as well. But that was very important to me at that time. So I brought it in. Like any complex adaptive system, needs to change in response to problems that develop in the course of time. Those problems are caused by both internal and external factors and by social, economic, technological, cultural, and political dynamics that are uncontrolled. If a political system is going to work in the long run, it needs to be able to solve those problems through its operations. Immobilist political systems, those that can't pass new legislation to meet their serious problems, but eventually become unstable and cease to serve the societies of which they are a part. That is the problem that now threatens us. I said this in July of 2009. And what followed since then? Well, of course, because of the influence of lobbyists and consultants and other things, the Democratic Party wasn't able to pass, a Medicare for All bill. It ended up, uh, of course, with the extremely inadequate healthcare plan that it passed, which the Republicans tore into and used as a whipping boy and used in 2010 to have a great big victory in the House. They took over the House with a thundering victory, at that time. And you recall, they immediately proceeded to start to plan after the victory of 2010. In January of 2011, they began to plan for debt ceiling crises that they were going to introduce, into the situation in order to extract concessions, from Democrats. and that led to austerity politics, okay, being played. Well, Obama started playing austerity politics actually in partly in 2009 and 2010, but it was greatly accelerated after the victory of the Republicans in the election of 2000, um, um, you know, um, uh, um, um, and 10. The failure to pass the Medicare for All bill was very, very important because it had the support, of a majority of the population. Still, it could not get passed. Okay, our Congress, what could get passed, was torn into by the Republican Party, and they used it as a whipping boy for years to come. I'm talking about the Affordable Care Act, of course. Now, I pointed out that failure to meet various serious problems would eventually cause the political system to become unstable and to cease to serve us, okay, uh, um, as a society. And of course, this did lead to extremism in politics and to the rise of Donald Trump and the presidency, okay, of Donald Trump and all the currents and trends we've seen towards becoming a fascist political system, which we're still seeing and which is a danger right now. Years ago, we used to make fun of the French and Italian political systems. I was thinking back there to the Italian and the French political systems of the 1950s and 1960s, where they would just, the systems of the parliaments uh, were failing to sustain governments in those polities every few months. It pretty much was chaos, okay, during those years. And we were making fun of, those systems, uh, telling everybody, including political scientists, okay, like myself, in the papers we wrote, we're all making fun of the French and Italian political systems uh, because they were so fragmented that their parliamentary governments were constantly failing while failing to solve the most serious problems of their society. But these days, I said in 2009, it is we who cannot achieve or maintain a sufficiently powerful consensus to move our society forwards. How many years has it been since we recognized that we needed to meet serious energy conservation, environmental, and climate problems? How many years has it been since we realized that American public schools were in trouble? I mean, of course, these problems still exist, right? How many years has it been since we recognized that economic inequality in America was increasing? How many years has it been since we recognized that we had no control over immigration to the United States? How many years has it been since we realized that our healthcare system needed reform? How long has it been since we recognized that we had serious problems of structural poverty, okay, and unemployment? Even when we move against short term problems such as the current recession or the wars in Iraq, okay, and Afghanistan, and here I perceived those were short term problems. I did not perceive, okay, at the time that we had a more long term problem, and that was our very hostile and conflictful foreign policies, okay, with other nations, and our imperialist approach to foreign policy. Okay, so going on. Uh, Even when we move against short term problems, such as the current recession, that was the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, 2010, and so on, or the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we cannot develop and maintain a consensus about what to do to solve these problems. So our solutions are inadequate. Short term problems take much longer to solve than would otherwise be the case, and sometimes become long term problems that are not solved for generations. I've said that at the center of the Gordian knot of maladaptiveness lies the filibuster in the Senate and the seniority system in both houses of Congress, because, you know, Those things were what was leading to the rise of people in both the Senate and the House who were thoroughly bought by the interests and who would not move legislation solving the problems through the House and the Senate. And I advocated we need to get rid of those practices so we can begin to fix the other problems with simple majorities and party discipline in both houses of Congress. The filibuster should be handled first using, quote, the nuclear option, unquote, as I've explained, in another place. Takes only a majority vote to exercise, the nuclear option, and once it is done, the filibuster need never come back because the procedural rule of the Senate would be superseded by the act of exercising the nuclear option. Of course, that was never used back in 2009. It could have been used to pass Medicare for all. It could have been used to pass very significant bills to help fix the climate and the environment. Okay, it could have been used to put through taxes in order to decrease the inequality, in our society. It could have been used for 100 different purposes because at the time there were 60 Democratic senators. But if you hadn't had the filibuster, the Republicans and those senators wouldn't have been able to dominate the Congress and to force compromises to come through the House. It was possible even then for Democrats to give away 10 votes from senators and pass certain good pieces of legislation, such as in the Medicare for All bill, H.R. 676, which was current at that time, but that, of course, could never get a vote because of the filibuster. If the Obama administration had wanted to pass it, it could have passed it if it had gotten, I don't remember whether Harry Reid was the majority leader. I believe he was in 2010. Yeah, he was. Certainly in 2009, in 2010. He could have exercised, the nuclear option. And he would have needed only 50 votes to pass H.R. 676. And I think those votes were there then. There was a situation where Democrats could have given away 10 votes from the right-wing Democrats and still passed that particular bill. Going on, the seniority system will be harder to handle in the short run since the junior members of the House and Senate who stand to gain the most from abolition of the system would probably be afraid to move against it while immersed in a congressional session. Also, the political process of overturning it would gain much greater momentum if opposition to the seniority system became a party commitment in a congressional election. This could be done, and the party advocating change were to win the election. The next Congress could be organized into committees whose leadership was appointed at the pleasure of the Speaker and the Majority Leader without seniority considerations entering into the process. This would increase the power of the Speaker and the Majority Leader relative to the members and greatly improve party discipline, which I thought was very important at that time to get these bills passed, and might be important now, but of course this assumes that it would be possible to get party leaders in the House and the Senate who would be willing to represent the people of the United States instead of the wealthy people and the large corporate interests. And as we know, this is a really, really big problem when we look at the party leaders now. They are all thoroughly bought by the interests and by the big money. So I go on. The United States is now a maladaptive giant whose political system cannot solve its national problems. While there are many aspects of its failure to adapt, its inability to pass legislation with simple majorities in both houses is a major factor in the immobilism of the system. This, in turn, is related to the way the filibuster, the seniority system, and the system of lobbying interact. So, what's also significant about this was at the time in 2009 and 2010, the Democrats still had control of both houses of Congress. You remember the Supreme Court came up with the CU decision in the early summer of 2010, if I recall correctly. It was in June of 2010. Now, the Democrats were looking very bad there in terms of their continued control of the system. The polls were really turning against them. But it still would have been possible at that time, without the filibuster being there and without the seniority system being so important, it still would have been possible because there was outrage when the Supreme Court passed the CU decision, creating the potential for the financial interests to get so much more powerful, than they are now. Within a 2-week period, the Democrats would have been able to respond by overcoming the decision of the Supreme Court just by passing a law, making it very, very explicit that the CU decision, was illegal. There would have been various ways to overcome it, at that time, including simply packing the court. In other words, with the big majorities the Democrats had, both in the Senate and the House, they could have packed the court in the summer of 2010 and before the election of 2010. They could have had a few more justices in there. It would only have taken 2 more justices. The CU decision was a 5-4 decision. They could have overturned it with legislative power at that time if they were willing to move fast, and to go there. And then we would not have had anywhere near the problems we have had with the private financial interests since that time, as the CU decision loomed larger and larger in our the recent elections. Without the CU decision, we wouldn't be having to contend with the super PACs at this time. The PACs would have been greatly constrained. It would have been possible at that time for the Democrats to defend themselves by passing new campaign finance laws. They could have invalidated CU itself simply by passing a new campaign finance law and using Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution to put the exceptions clause into their new campaign finance laws, so the Supreme Court would not have been able to review those laws. So, I point out we really can't do anything about lobbying without fixing the other 2 problems first, because those who benefit from lobbyist funding will simply refuse to pass the anti-lobbying laws, as they are now doing. But we can do something about the filibuster and the seniority system if we mobilize opinion against them and get people to understand that their government is the best that money can buy, primarily because of these 2 features of Congress. So let's stop lamenting the disappointing outcomes in reform legislation we've seen this year and begin to work against these 2 important props of our immobilist and dysfunctional political system. There is no room in American democracy for either of these two anti democratic elements. Obviously, there was something I hadn't thought of in 2009, which fits in beautifully here, and that is uh, where I say we really can't do anything about lobbying without fixing the other two problems first, because the truth is, can do something about the lobbying and the influence of money in politics. And what we can do today is to develop to dump the corruption movement, to go at that directly. And once we've gone at that, and once we get rid of the influence of toxic money in politics through using the rule, which I'm going to display again once more just for the hell of it. So let me. I'm still not able to unmute Dee's mic, but what I want to do now is look at the rule here. Again, since that time, I thought up this rule: vote against every candidate except those who won't take money from wealthy corporations, from individuals, from PACs or party committees, and who repudiate all super PAC support. It is now possible for people to act using this rule and to get all the people who take the toxic money, to get them out of Congress, do a real house cleaning. And once you've done this house cleaning, then of course it is going to be possible to pass the campaign finance laws that we need, including campaign finance bills with the exceptions clause. Okay, and if we used the exceptions clause, the Supreme Court would not be able to do anything about it, and we would be able to quickly pass laws from a new Congress that didn't have any big money in it, which would constrain the financial interests from influencing our politics, would simply throw them out of politics. We could get rid of the PACs. We could get rid of the big money from the wealthy people. It would be easy in that first particular Congress. And so that's where Dump the Corruption fits into this, in fixing the immobilism of our political system. Dee, any comments?
Not too much, no. I have a lot of noise here in the house, so
I'm sorry, you had what?
there's just a lot of noise here, so I kind of was back and forth with the show.
Yeah, I know. I know that was unfortunate. Okay, so Steve Wolfbrand asked Andy if she lives in a shoe.
The woman of the show.
Yeah, and Robert Copeland said, "Hi, everybody," once again. Evelina said, "Not sure the Sun Belt will be desirable for long, with extreme heat becoming the new normal." Robert Copeland said, "We are supporting a ballot measure called Justice for Renters Act, which will repeal a law called Costa-Hawkins, which limits rent control in California. That would be a wonderful ballot measure to pass." Case is good, Robert shared to Facebook. Robert says, "Damn, I made another typo." Steve says, "Share it to Facebook." Robert Coleman says, "Let me say, public housing is way underfunded as living conditions in several public housing apartment complexes here in Sacramento need severe renovations as living conditions are terrible. Steve says rent control is the way to go. Well, in the old days, it was certainly the way to go in New York City. I was brought up. I uh, was born into and brought up in rent control apartments. Okay, in the Bronx, and these were rent controlled. Okay, until my mother died in 1961, and my father moved out to Long Island sometime in 1963 and 1964. Our apartment was still a rent controlled apartment. I think for all those years it varied between somewhere around $65 a month. And when my father moved out in 1964, I think it was still only as high as $95 a month. It was a 5 room apartment by our standards. Today it was a gigantic apartment. It must have been, I don't know, 1,600 square feet. Bedrooms were really, really large. The living room, the dining room, the whole place was really wonderful. So I'm a big proponent, okay, of rent control. Steve Wolfbrand says we have a community parade next weekend. It's a lot of fun. The kids get to show off their stuff. First time since the pandemic. And cases like that here in Ohio too. If Ukraine loses, we have to send in soldiers. Why, Kay? Why do we have to send in soldiers? Why do we have to send in soldiers? Let the Russians impose their will in this particular situation. It looks like they're going to leave a Ukraine state as independent, but tightly tied to Russia in the way, okay, that Belarus is tied, okay, to Russia today. That's not a bad fate. Okay, the Belarusians, okay, are doing very, very well. The western part of Ukraine will probably not be included in the reconstituted area, okay, of Ukraine by the Russians, okay, because the Russians don't want to have anything to do with the Nazis there. So they're going to be off by themselves somewhere, uh, and they're going to have to face what the rest of Europe really thinks about them. And I don't think that's going to be a very high opinion at all. But I really want to ask, why do we have to send in soldiers? Current situation in Ukraine is that a population of 44 million before the war is down to maybe 18 to 20 million right now. Many of these people don't intend, okay, to come back to Ukraine. So why do we have to send in any of our soldiers? Why do we have to spend any money on that? Why don't we just mind our own business? So Kay asks Dee if you have anything to say.
Well, on that note, what you were just talking about, Joe, that's the first thing I thought about when I saw Kay's comment was we really need to mind our own business. Just all over the world, just mind our own business.
Yes, I know that sentiment might be characterized by some, okay, as an isolationist sentiment, but I don't think that either of us, okay, are isolationist. I mean, I think the United States has gone too far in trying to control what happens in the whole world. It cannot be, okay, our role. I mean, if you look at us, we have 335 million people here. They have 1.4 billion in China. In India, there are 1.4 billion people. What right do we have to control the 8 billion people of the world? And it's increasingly plain that we don't have the capacity to control them either. We don't have the material capacity. We don't have the armed forces. We no longer have the industrial capability to compete with the Russians in the area of the production of arms. So why would we send in soldiers? The Russians would slaughter our soldiers. Don't you understand that, Kay?
And we have so much to take care of here at home.
And we have
So
so
much.
much to take care of here at home, right? But it's so important to understand that the Russians would slaughter our soldiers. We have only 400,000 effective ground troops that are available to send anywhere now. Okay, the Russians have now destroyed uh, most of a Ukrainian armed force of 600,000. Why would we want to send in our 400,000 and get them destroyed too?
Because
Also,
everybody is somebody's family member.
yes. And the truth is, we cannot even mobilize the 400,000 just for Ukraine because we need most of these troops for other areas of the world. We maybe could get at most 40 to 60,000 and send them into Ukraine. I mean, the Russians would slaughter us. We don't even have the artillery munitions to contest, okay, with them. We don't have the air forces to contest with their planes in that region of the world. We don't have the bases that are close enough to be effective, okay, in Ukraine. Also, NATO as a whole, our allies there are spent. They've already sent most of their weapons into Ukraine, and those weapons were destroyed by the Russians. I mean, I shouldn't say D, I should say K. You have to clearly understand the difference in military capacity. What we have left of our superior military capacity is our submarines with their with the nuclear capability, okay, of our submarines. We probably still have an advantage there over the Chinese and Russians. How long that advantage is going to last, okay, I don't know. But we can't use, okay, the nuclear weapons in ground combat inside, okay, of Ukraine. And if we used those weapons to try to destroy the Russians on their home ground, they would reply with hypersonic missiles and more warheads than we have. And we have no defense against those hypersonic missiles. We don't have hypersonic missiles yet. We have no way to intercept the missiles they could fire, okay, in retaliation that would therefore blow up our cities. There was an issue that arose somewhere midway through this war where some people were saying, uh, would we be willing to trade Krakow for Boston? Because there was some speculation that maybe the Russians would try in a nuclear attack uh, to knock out that particular city uh, um, um, in Poland. So people pointed out, well, if we did that, okay, if they did that, okay, okay, if we did something, I've got the example wrong, but the basic point is, uh, if somebody attacked in such a way, okay, to destroy Krakow, would we be willing to accept, okay, a retaliatory attack that would destroy the city of Boston, the city, okay, of similar size? And the answer that immediately occurs to everyone is no, we would not. We would not like that kind of exchange. It's not something that any of us want. So D, anything more?
No, I'm just so fed up with all this
Okay,
war.
so I still have something more, okay, about that. The general comment is we have to become very realistic about what our military capabilities are. And I don't just mean our leaders, our defense companies, and our military industrial complex. The people of the United States have to come to recognize how our military stacks up against the Russian military, the Chinese military, the Indian military, the Pakistani military, the Iranian military. Did I mention the Russian military? I think I did. Uh, okay, the Turkish military. There are lots, okay, of other militaries that could put up a pretty good fight against us. And if those militaries came together in a unified fight against us, we could never win a war over there, okay, again. We, okay, and our allies. Now, they might not be able to win a war over here because they might not be able to project their power here. I don't expect in the short run that they'll be able to do it. They haven't built up the capability yet, and they have no reason to build up the capability. If we withdraw from there, they're just going to leave us alone so they can do business, so they can complete the Belt, okay, and Road Initiative and the construction of the economic bloc that they are rapidly building. That's what they want to do. And if we don't like that, we can stop conflicting with them and try to construct various deals of our own that eventually would give us enough to say economically that we could join the economic integration of the whole world, which is obviously what China is planning to do. Hi, Jeff Denton. How are you? Glad to see you here. Long time no see. I think you've missed most of the fireworks, okay, already. Okay, any other comments, everybody? Laugh out loud, Steve. We live on Schumacher Boulevard, though. Andy Candy, where is Schumacher Boulevard? Is that a place in Los Angeles? Or is that in Ohio? Kay says, hi, Jeff. Okay, folks, I'm about to say good night. Are you going to have a show tomorrow night, Dee?
Probably Sunday night.
Probably Sunday night. Okay. So I will plan to be there
Sunday.
on Sunday night. Then, if you change your mind, then let me know,
Oh, I will.
and I will come then on Saturday night. Okay, Denver, Iowa. There's a Schumacher Boulevard both in Denver and in Iowa. Okay, or is Denver, Iowa a place? Is there a Denver in Iowa?
Kind of weird, doesn't it?
Steve Wilprin says, good night, everybody. Good night, Steve. Thank you for coming. I think it is time to say good night. So thank
Yes,
you
it
for
is.
coming, Dee, and good night, okay, to you,
To Betty.
and good night to everybody.
Yes. Good night to Bonnie, I mean. Say Betty.
Good night.
Good night. And guess what? Everybody's got to make sure they hit the like button, subscribe, and share.
Yes, please do. And remember to buy us coffees, please, or to contribute
To the shows.
to my Patreon account. That would be very
Yes.
welcome at this point. So thank you, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And
See you again.
we'll see you next week. I should probably remark that I've been doing some videos with Shane Coughlin. Those are just interviews.
Okay.
He is setting up a new effort, which is strictly focused in the MMT area. And he asked me to do some interviews for that. So I've done 2 so far. Actually, altogether, I think I've done 4 so far. But I think there are another 2 to do shortly. I don't know when he's going to publish those, because they're waiting, doing some other things. They want to, kind of release everything about the new effort, okay, at once. But I've been doing some of those things, and
Okay.
dealing with MMT questions alone. There are some other things, okay, in the works that I'll be telling you about as time goes on. I will not be joining Shane's new effort, but only participating, okay, in a limited way, to do some MMT stuff, okay, with him.
Okay.
So everybody, good night. I'll be back with my regular schedule next week, and I'll be helping with these programming either on Saturday or Sunday.
Yes.
So you can look for me then and for Dee. And you can look for us both from Tuesday through Friday next week.
Yes, you can.
And Steve says, sleep well. Thank you, Steve. And Kay says, okay, I love you all, and we love you too, Kay. Someday you have to let me know why you're so committed, Kay, to the Ukrainians. I'm just curious about that. I say that because from my point of view, the government there is full, okay, of Nazis. And so, okay, I don't know why you're so concerned about them.
A lot of it depends on the news source, where people, get their news from and who they're listening to.
Yeah, I agree. That's very true. But okay, the reason why I was wondering about it was because I think that the Kay's grandmother, who she was very close to, uh, uh, okay, was from gypsy stock,
Mm-hmm.
of course, and it's very well known, okay, that the Nazis were even harder on the gypsies than they were on the Jews. So anyway, that's just a historical comment. So I think on that note, I'm going to say good night. Okay, once again.
Yes, good night, everybody. And like Joe
And
said, we'll see you again.
we'll see you over the weekend.
Yes, you will.
And we'll see you on Tuesday.
Yes, good night.
Bye.